If you love playing chess but hate being attacked, well, today's your lucky day, because I'm going to show you guys how to punish an aggressive opponent. My name is Philip and I'm a 2100 FIDE rated player from New Zealand, and I make these videos to help you improve your chess. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you guys one of the most instructive games that I've ever seen. It was one of the most influential games that I had seen as I was learning chess and learning how to become stronger as a player on my way up, so to speak. And I want to show you guys today, this is the final position where black resigned after rook takes g5 check. So let's see how we got to this point, and let's see what you guys can learn from this and apply it to your games. So white is future world champion Alekhine, who dominated the 1920s and 30s. And black is very strong player Geza Maroczy. He was one of the top players at the time. The Maroczy bind was named after him, if you guys are familiar with that pawn structure. And play started with a queen's gambit declined. So a lot of you may have played this opening as white or black. And this knight e4 move seems to have been quite popular at that time because it allows black to simplify the position a little bit and trade off a couple of minor pieces. So let's pause here for a little bit. It's a very simple queen's gambit decline where the pawn structure is pretty stable and both sides have traded a knight and a bishop. However, the only problem is the bishops that are left over are the light squared bishops, and black is going to find himself in a bit of trouble if he's not careful with that bishop being blocked in by its own pawns. But let's see how black handles that, or doesn't handle it. We'll see. c6, again blocking in that bishop, but will black find a way to get it out? We'll see. Bishop to d3, nice and very standard. Knight to d7, castles, and f5. And this is the first mistake that black has made, first big mistake. Black is going for a stonewall type structure. So a lot of you guys either will have played this even as white with the pawn on f4, or have opponents played it against you, and it can lead to some brutal attacks. So black is going to want to attack white on the king side. That's essentially what black is saying. Black is saying, I'm going to get my knight to f6 and then to e4. I'm going to hammer it into that square with these pawns protecting it. And if you take, one of my pawns is going to end up on e4. And I'm going to have a very strong position and very strong grip on the center, which is all fine. But Alekhine says, okay, well, you're not really helping your pieces get into the game, and you've weakened your king side a little bit. So I'm just going to move my rook from a1 to c1, just slightly improve my position, get my pieces out. And this is really where things start taking a turn for the worse. Black really should consider, if not on this move, then very soon, getting that knight to f6, because if that knight doesn't come to f6, how are you going to get that bishop out? And if you can't get that bishop out, how are you going to get the rook out? So the only other option black should be considering is b6, with the idea to play the bishop to b7 and then simplify with c5. However, black played g5, and this is the signal from black to say, look, my last two moves have been f5 and g5. If you're not getting the pattern of my moves, my next move is probably going to be h5 or g4, etc., etc. I'm going to push my pawns on the king side and essentially try to attack you off the bat. The problem is, there's a couple of problems. The first one is, like we said, the bishop is just not in a better position than it had been earlier on. That knight is not in a good position either. That knight should ideally be on e4, which is 2 moves away, to be anywhere near attacking white's king. Furthermore, black is really opening up some air around his king. And this is where one of the golden principles in chess comes into play. And I didn't understand this principle until I saw this game, and then I really understood it and I started applying it to my games. And the principle is, if you are faced with an attack on the flanks, meet it with a counterattack in the center. And it sounds, okay, cool. So if my opponent's attacking on the flanks or on the king side or the queen side, why would I attack on the center? Why does that work geometrically or whatever? This game shows you exactly why. Because after g5, Alekhine played knight to d2. It looks like it's moving a defender away from the kingside, but white's plan is to put that pawn on f3 and blast open the center with e4. Once the center's blasted open, that king is going to feel naked. So, yeah, you know, if you've ever gone outside in the rain with no shirt on, maybe it's a similar feeling. I don't know. I don't do that often. Rook to f7 was played. And we'll come back to why this is a strange move in a couple of moves' time, because it's going to make more sense. But again, if we think about it, what do we want to do as black? We want to get these queenside pieces out and into the attack. However, we can't do that because this knight is in the way of our bishop. So knight to f6 and then knight to e4, possibly, would make sense. And knight to f6 is the best move. Black, I mean, can't really continue attacking without more pieces in the attack. And rook f7 is a strange move because are we really trying to get the rook to g7, or where are we trying to get the rook? You know, it doesn't make sense. And watch what Alekhine does. f3, and Geza really does not read the position. He plays e5. He says, if you're going to try blow open the center, I'm going to try blow open the center too. Walking into Alekhine's plan. C takes d5, c takes d5, e4. And now look at that. The center is blown open and all of these pawns are going to be traded. F takes e4, f takes e4. Rook trade on f1, and here again, this is where we really see what was the purpose of rook to f7, because all we've done is we've wasted a move as black because we've had to trade the rook off anyway. And again, black is no closer to developing that queenside. So hopefully you guys can start seeing how this is becoming very dangerous for black very quickly. E takes d4. And now this is the crucial moment in the game, because your initial thought might be to take the pawn. However, I'm fairly certain this is what Geza was counting on, because after queen to c5, that pins the queen to the king. Queen takes, knight takes, and the bishop drops back. And after the bishop drops back, we have a trade on e4. The knights are traded off, the bishops, and then after bishop to e6, it's an equal position, or relatively equal. It's an end game, and black has very good drawing chances. You know, if white played something like that, we would simply come in this way, and we'd actually might be slightly better as black because we've got pressure on that a2 pawn and more active pieces. So I'm pretty sure that is what Geza would have been counting on. Queen takes d4. However, Alekhine replied with an absolute hammer. Now let's think about it from a principle perspective, because this is what I want you guys to think when it comes to your games. We are wanting to take advantage of the fact that our opponent has weakened their king. How do we do that? We don't do that by trading queens. We do that by keeping the queens on the board, because that's going to increase our counter-attacking chances. So where can we move our queen to be in the most aggressive spot and not trade off? Well, queen to c7 is the move. Now, if the queen comes to c5, there is no check because that pawn is in black's own way. And what black has done is essentially just let the white queen jump in behind with queen to d8. And if something like king to g7 is played, the queen's coming to g5, collecting a pawn. After something like that, we're going to take here, and the bishop, the rook, the queen, everything is pointed towards black's king. Black's king is cornered and open. This knight is coming into e4 and f6. It's game over. This queen can always drop back with checkmate threats. So this is absolutely catastrophic for black. So black cannot play queen to c5. So what can black play instead? Well, black, again, wants to move that knight, but now cannot because of the pin. So if you can't move the knight, you can't move the bishop. If you can't move the bishop, you can't move the rook. So How do we get rid of that pin? Well, black actually doesn't do a good job of doing this. He walks in and adds another piece onto that rank, which doesn't really help black. And Alekhine followed up with rook to f5, putting pressure on that g5 pawn. And simply after takes, the knight comes into play. The rook is in play as well. There's pressure on the king. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, every single one of white's pieces is active and hammering down on that king. White's threatening to take on g5. So black's best move is probably going to be h6. But even if black could spend 2 moves in this position, let's say h6 was the first move, this is how horrible black's position is, and this is how you guys should be thinking in your games. What would black's next move be? Well, how does black unravel? This knight again can't move because the queen is pinned, and even if the queen moved somewhere, the knight is still pinned because of the king. So if the knight can't move and the bishop can't move as a result, and the rook can't move, well, what can move? There's nothing for black that can move. Black is completely tangled up. If the queen dropped to e8 or anywhere else, it starts allowing pieces into this 6th rank. If the queen tried to go to b4, which is actually, instead of h6, what was played, then you're actually giving the queen access to d8. And that's essentially what happened. Black is saying, I'm going to try one more trick, maybe queen e1 stuff, even though the bishop can block on f1 and so can the rook. But white simply took on g5 on move 22 and black resigned because it's mate in 6. That's how catastrophic this game went for black, who tried to attack prematurely. Just to give you a couple of sample lines, maybe one of the simplest ones is king to f8, and we would go queen to d8, and then the king jumps back up, queen g8, king e7, rook g7 checkmate. And I'll just give you guys one more line for good measure. If let's see, which one should we do? Let's say king to f7, the bishop checks, and here we might go king to e7, rook to e5, the knight is pinned, the knight's had a horrible game, worst player on the pitch, king to f8, queen to d8, queen g8 check, oops, not g7, queen to g5 checkmate. So there we go. That king is getting checkmated wherever it goes, and that's why in this position after rook to g5, black resigned. Hope you guys got something out of that video. Hope you liked it. And just before we depart, if you've watched this far, or if you're subscribed, or if you're not, subscribe. But also, after nearly 100 videos, I've decided to make a website. So I've put a link in the description and the bio. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, there's a couple of videos that will come up on the end screen here. Click on one of them to continue learning about chess. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.